And that's kind of the important other component here. When we say adult use over the age of 21, we mean any adult over the age of 21. So the idea is really kind of analogous to the way we have tobacco shops and other things set up, where there's regulation, there are taxes around it, and a structure in which these individual places can operate.
So post-conviction relief was brought up, and DA Kunzweiler, I want to get your take on this. What exactly would that mean for people who have this on their record?
So really what I would say, and you've talked earlier about what this, in common layperson's terminology, what this means. I kind of call this criminal justice reform hidden in the veil of legalization of marijuana. In essence, what they're asking is to restructure a lot of critical things when it comes to how we deal with our kids in this state. For instance, under this particular proposal, what it takes away is a parent's ability, if you're involved in some kind of a divorce custody proceeding, you as a parent, if you were concerned about the other parent's consumption of marijuana or possession of marijuana or growing of marijuana or actually manufacturing intense concentrates of marijuana. This thing actually allows for that to be done in homes and in apartments or any place that a landlord might not want to have that. And then it removes from the ability of the parent to bring that to the attention of the courts, so that if I wanted to make sure my kids weren't exposed to that type of a hazardous environment and I felt like it was a threat to the safety of my children, I've never seen a state question ever try to recategorize what child endangerment does. And so the question, they don't want to categorize it as legalization. Why do we need criminal justice reform embedded within what they're trying to represent or package up as legalization of marijuana? So there's plenty of hidden measures within this that are very dangerous for kids.
So can the criminal justice reform happen without legalizing recreational marijuana?
It certainly can, and that was one of the questions I asked Damien before, is like, why don't we just deal with the marijuana issue as it stands alone? And I know Scott knows about this. We already have medical marijuana in this state, and we already know how, quite the train wreck it's become. We now lead the nation in black market marijuana. We have foreign nationals from 9 different countries off of 3 different continents operating criminal syndicates in this state. Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics reports that they seized over 226,000, I think, pounds, or 26,000 pounds of processed marijuana, illegal marijuana. If we've got these operations that are operating legally, then why do we have a black market?
So while we're talking about crime, will legalizing recreational marijuana make crime worse here in Oklahoma? Let's hear some others chime in here.
Well, on behalf of Farm Bureau members all around the state and all 77 counties, we strongly believe that more marijuana would not be a good thing, because the negatives that it has brought would only be increased through the expansion. And no one that we work with believes that there is a problem accessing marijuana today. This new proposal could only lead to increases in the problems. And so we do believe that the crime associated with this, as we amplify what we're already doing, would increase. And we talked a little bit about the tax revenue that would come in earlier to treat all sorts of problems associated with this. We don't think it's a great trade-off to create more problems just to find more money to pay for the problems that it caused in the first place. So we feel like pouring gas on this fire of problems that we have had is a mistake, and it's the wrong time. As we work with the state legislature to try to fix what the voters passed in 2018 that had several flaws, and it's taken us 4 and 5 years to begin that process, we think that this is a bad time to amplify the negatives that came along with the last state question.
So if I might add, as we talk about the numbers and would it increase, last month, in the month of January, 293,000 marijuana plants were put in soil in the state of Oklahoma. Currently in the state of Oklahoma, roughly 375,000 citizens have a medical marijuana license. So if you take the population that's not allowed to have a marijuana license out of that number, it really is high. It's a really high percentage of Oklahomans, for whatever reason, are using some form of medical marijuana. And so the voters have, been very loud and clear that they wanted marijuana. However, when you look at the staggering numbers of dispensaries and grow operations and the number of pounds that Oklahoma's producing, and Mr. District Attorney, it's 600,000 pounds seized by OB&DD in illegal marijuana sales. The saturation is just, it's off the chart. And so there is not enough people in the state of Oklahoma that legally have a license that can consume as much marijuana that is being grown in the state of Oklahoma, which, to your point, is why you see Oklahoma is the number one exporter, I would say, in the country for illicit marijuana being sold and trafficked across state lines. OB&DD has been a great asset to the state. We've put, for the past 2 years, we've put $5 million a year into their marijuana task force to try to help curtail this illegal foreign national market, but we have not scratched the surface. Now, with that being said, OB&DD does tell me that by April, I believe, of this year, that they will have had either surrendered or seized over 3,000, roughly 3,000 medical marijuana grow licenses in the state of Oklahoma.
I think it's important, if we're going to have the conversation about Oklahoma's illicit market, to have that conversation in the context of facts. So if we know that hundreds of thousands of Oklahomans are currently illegally buying medical marijuana from friends and family who have medical cards, to my mind, it makes common sense then to tax and regulate that product. We also know that DA Kunzweiler, the Tulsa police across the state aren't planning to knock down the doors of Oklahomans and check whether or not they have medical cards. They don't plan on doing criminal enforcement. So there will be no uniform criminal enforcement of laws around cannabis, which to my mind means that we have to decriminalize. If the enforcement isn't going to be uniform, if it's not going to be, you are breaking the law, we will treat you the same way no matter where you are in the state, then why not provide an opportunity for all of that product to be taxed and regulated? Right now, Oklahoma has a Colorado-style massive marijuana industry, but we do not have any of the tax revenue or resources to manage that. I want DAs and prosecutors and people across the state to have the resources that they need to go after people who would be audacious enough to sell these products to children. I want public health officials to be able to educate the public on the risks of marijuana, because this isn't a product without risk, every drug.
So Damien, let's speak to that, right? You're saying that you want to provide those things, but the reality is, under this state question, you've made it the point that somebody who's in high school, who's a drug dealer, right, could come into your kid's school and possess and share, that's what they call it, share marijuana with other students in the high school. And the punishment would be maybe 4 hours worth of counseling or up to a $100 fine, regardless of how many times that drug dealer comes into that school under the age, he's a high schooler, right? Or she's a high schooler. And that's how we're going to treat them, right? In my world, when I've got a delinquent person who's a drug dealer, I haul them down to juvenile, and we address their drug dealing behaviors. You have included in this state question, and that's why I say it's more a criminal justice reform measure than it is a legalization. You now want to allow drug dealers in your schools to be able to provide drugs to kids on a daily basis, where the maximum punishment is a $100 fine or 4 hours worth of counseling, and that's never going to work. And you talk about, well, we want to provide the resources to law enforcement. Okay, well, you counted them out. You talked about the percentages that would be allocated. Not one of those dollars is going to law enforcement, right? You talked about it's going to social services. You talked about it's going into general revenue fund. You talked about it going into mental health. I didn't see a category. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'll accept it, but I don't know that there was a specific thing broken out that says, "Hey, we're going to give this percentage to law enforcement." So the reality is, it just builds on itself over and over and over again, and law enforcement's already overwhelmed. The representative just said that. We're overwhelmed about what we're already having to deal with medical marijuana.
And our experience has been that the criminal element wasn't everyday Oklahomans who were purchasing this. It was more with the industry and the growers and the wholesalers and the business side of this that were the criminal element involved. And it just certainly appears that this proposal does nothing to try to address what we've seen as the major part. And like I said, in all 77 counties, we have had an increase in these criminal organizations. And this proposal doesn't propose anything to fix those issues.
So we're going to
I
switch gears
believe
now to.
that the proposal itself is the fix to those issues. I believe it's a week from today will be the 104th anniversary of Prohibition, which in the United States created the largest crime syndicates ever to exist on the face of the earth. Those crime syndicates and that Prohibition created the likes of Al Capone and Lucky Luciano and all of the names that we know from 100 years ago. That crime and that blood on the streets didn't stop until we ended Prohibition some 14 years later. And I believe that this state question addresses that with the question itself. The answer to ending the criminal conduct is not to make more criminal conduct, it is to legalize it, to allow honest, hardworking people that are trying to feed their families and raise their children to succeed in the industry, and that removes the criminal element. It takes the money away from the criminals so that they can't buy the people and the guns and the things that make crime thrive in Oklahoma. We starve them out and put that money in the pockets of honest, hard-working Oklahomans to build a better life for their families, and that's how we fight the crime.
So answer this question, so why then does California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, all those states that had legalization, why are their crime rates exploding? Your argument runs counter to that. They are having rampant homelessness, rampant problems with their crime rate, rampant problem with drugs. It's the exact opposite. And I know what business you're in. You're in the business of advancing, trying to make money. My best argument on this thing is ask anybody at home. Tell me one good thing about tobacco. And I'll bet anybody at home would sit there and scratch their heads like, yeah, what is there good about tobacco? The only benefit that's to tobacco is there's a revenue source that comes from it. But what did we learn? We learned that the big tobacco industry manipulated the nicotine concentration in their product so that they could create addiction, to create generations of dependent people. And then they profited on it and they hid those statistics. And ultimately we have generations of people who've lost their lives to cancer. We know from all the research that's out there, Mark, from all that research, we know that this enhanced marijuana is addictive. We know it's causing mental health problems. We know it influences depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation. So what's the rush to get this done now? Well, I'd say it's the big marijuana who's rushing because they know if people learn the hazards like we learned with cigarettes, it's going to impact their bottom line. This is about profit. This isn't about bringing more money into the state. Colorado right now, for every dollar they bring in revenue, it costs them $4.50 in the dealing with the legalization of marijuana, in hospitalizations, in children who are ingesting these things and going to poison control, in dealing with mental health hospitalizations. It is a complete lie, and they know it, and that's why they're trying to rush this down the pike.
We're going to switch gears now to talk about the impact behind the wheel after recreational marijuana passed. In the states you mentioned, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety says that there was a more than 5% increase in crashes compared to neighboring states. So does insurance cover a crash that was caused by a driver with marijuana in their system?
Is that directed to anyone in particular?
Whoever wants to jump in.
So insurance works the same way in the context of negligent motor vehicle crashes, be they alcohol, be it any sort of negligent motor vehicle claim relative to being being under the influence of a substance. So that wouldn't change anything. And that kind of really is the broader point here. So we know that tobacco is the leading cause of preventable death in the U.S. We know that alcohol is the third leading cause of preventable death in the U.S., including car crashes related to alcohol and all of those sorts of pieces. But we don't then say the next piece, right? That the rational way to respond to that social cost and to that crisis is prohibition, to criminalize alcohol or to criminalize tobacco. What this is really about, and I work for an organization that will not profit one dime if State Question 820 passes. What this is really about is justice. We know that the criminalization of cannabis was designed to target Black and brown communities. We know that even now, even at a time period where more than 20 states have decriminalized, the racial disparities in the arrest and incarceration for marijuana and its use were 4 times higher for Black folks, people who look like me, than they were for white Americans. And we know that the rate of people experiencing homelessness is 10 times higher than the national average for people with justice involvement. We know that the unemployment rate is 5 times higher. And we know that there are thousands of Oklahomans, largely Black and brown Oklahomans like me, who have been inhibited from buying a house, inhibited from good paying jobs, inhibited from good paying education, all because of a low level marijuana conviction. That's the rush. These thousands of Oklahomans who were criminalized by this system don't want to wait until we do more studies to determine whether or not we should do what is actually happening. The DAs and police officers across the state of Oklahoma are not prosecuting the illegal activity of most Oklahomans who are illegally procuring marijuana through their friends and families with medical marijuana licenses. If that is true, it only makes sense to allow those individuals who have old marijuana convictions that are making it harder for them to keep food on the table to bring their families and themselves into the light of day.
So Damien, I would take issue with that because that's just not true to sit there and categorize low level. I wouldn't call a drug dealer a low level of marijuana crime. I wouldn't call a drug cultivator a low level crime. Right? You want to go back in history and pretend as though these people are just simply somebody that's possessing marijuana and now it's tormenting them. You can certainly propose, and I agreed with you at the last setting that we had on this thing, that we could come up with a law that could provide some forgiveness or have these people say, all right, here's kind of the deal. I've lived a good life since I got caught up in my criminal past, but now I've got a solid job and I want to get back into the marketplace. And we could craft up a law, but don't use this broad brush to sit there and say it should apply to everybody who's ever had some kind of what you call low-level marijuana crime. These people are drug dealers who go out and they get involved with violent conduct and people die as a result of it. And what you want to do is say, hey, if I was going after a guy who shot up a neighborhood, and in addition to that, he had a prior drug distribution charge, that prior drug distribution charge could not be considered by the jury, so now reduce his sentence while he's serving the punishment for shooting people up. That's patently wrong, and it doesn't protect Oklahoma citizens. Now, here's the one thing I do want to bring to your attention, and I'd rather you argue about this. Why are you not getting angry about what the marijuana industry does? We know statistically what that industry does is it does move its dispensaries to the neighborhoods that are brown and Black. They know that that's where the highest concentration of individuals are more likely to perhaps go to it. It's impoverished neighborhoods, and they move their dispensaries to concentrate on the people you're trying to protect. Why aren't you aggravated about that? And why don't you look and see all these owners who own these operations, how many of them actually are minorities? How many of them are actually white business people who came out of the tobacco industry? They realized what happened in tobacco, and now they're trying to get into marijuana and profit one more time off of the backs of disadvantaged populations. You should be angry about that as opposed to try and claim that somehow that this is something that's affecting your population disproportionately simply because of consumption. They are going after your citizens and they're trying to make life more difficult for them. I want to protect those communities, but not this way.
I think it is an oversimplification to say that any industry as complicated as the marijuana industry has been targeting black communities, especially when we look at communities like Altus, Atoka. These are not black communities. They have a large amount of dispensaries near Altus and Atoka. In fact, in the state of Oklahoma, a state that has one of the highest number of dispensaries per capita in the nation, it is rural counties and the satellite counties around them that have had large numbers of growers. What we want is for the criminalization of these communities to stop these individuals, to stop separating families from economic power. It is the criminalization also that makes those illicit markets so violent. The easiest way to produce violence and to produce those downstream effects that you keep talking about is to criminalize a market where we know the police are not prosecuting uniformly.
Well, I think
I get a
Representative
chuckle.
Fedgatter could reinforce that at the Capitol today, criminal justice reform is one of the more popular topics over the last number of years. And so that's why this proposal goes way too far in the things that it touches. Some of the things that Damien speaks passionately about can be addressed and are part of packages being addressed every day at the state capitol. Governor Stitt has championed those issues, and the legislature entertained those all the time. That's been a major topic already this session. And the inequities that Damien talks about can be addressed in a much more safe way than with this proposal.
We're going to go
I would
to
say that the state legislature a few years ago, along with the governor, had the largest commutation of prisoners in the state of Oklahoma in the history of our country. So criminal justice reform over the past 6 years has been a topic of discussion and been something that we have worked with law enforcement all across the state, as well as your organization, to try to fix these problems. I want to go back though, I don't necessarily know that the criminal element that we see in Oklahoma is a bunch of Oklahomans. That's the problem. And when we talk about tax revenue, the medical marijuana program brought in, I think, around $55 million last year in excise tax as well as sales tax. That doesn't include licensing fees. But when you have an industry that has more product than demand, it creates one thing. It creates a black market. And that black market in Oklahoma, a pound of indoor grown marijuana in the state of Oklahoma right now, you're lucky to sell for $1,000 a pound. If it's outdoor grown marijuana in the state of Oklahoma, you're lucky to legally sell that for $150 to $200 a pound. If you send that to New York, Chicago, wherever you want to send that to, it's $4,000 to $6,000 a pound, and it doesn't matter whether it was grown indoor or outdoor. They're just looking for marijuana. So what has happened is we've had these large criminal organizations that have come in. I've seen these flow charts of these criminal organizations. They look like major corporation flow charts. And so I think most of the illegal activity going on in the state of Oklahoma is from people who decided Oklahoma was too loose because there was a state question that was passed and the state legislature was not in session. They had 60 days to implement the program and start selling licenses. The state legislature then came back into session, and I was somebody who had no desire to work on marijuana, but there were very few people who wanted to, so I dove into this subject matter and began writing laws. And that first year, there was a House bill that I wrote. It was a big omnibus bill, and the governor vetoed that bill, and the Senate wouldn't override that veto. Had we not had that veto, we would not be dealing with a large amount of the criminal activity that's gone on, especially in our rural counties today. In the legislature, we continue to not fix problems with the current program. So when you put this program on top of that, the question then becomes, and I'm neither for or against this state question. I'm a state legislator. It's not my job to tell people how to vote. It's their job to ask me questions, and I will give them my opinions and what happens at the Capitol. But when you look at what's happening in the state of Oklahoma, we cannot catch up on the criminal element in the state of Oklahoma. And they are not, for the majority, Oklahomans that are creating these
When did that
problems.
begin? The criminal element, the bad element, did that begin when medical marijuana came in?
Well, I think
How long have we had that?
I think we could all agree that there's been criminal element that has sold illegal drugs, throughout history. With that being said, though, we saw a large explosion in the state of Oklahoma roughly 12 months after the legalization of the state question. That's when we started seeing foreign nationals coming into the state of Oklahoma, setting up straw man business operations, buying property, and they were paying more than the local citizens could even think about paying. I know of a 40-acre tract that, 5 years ago was worth $70,000 at the most. And they came in and they paid $400,000 for 40 acres. Nobody can compete with that. They put in a large marijuana grow, and they're still doing business today. And so that began about 12 months after the first licenses started getting issued. Now we're starting to see some of those businesses leave the state because they fear that we are going to catch up with them. And if I have anything to do with it, I'm going to do everything I can within, the legislative body to continue to preach the message. We have to write laws that restrict the people we allow to do business in the state of Oklahoma. Currently, $2,500, $2,700, no felony for 2 years, and you fill out an application, you get a license to operate a marijuana business in the state of Oklahoma. I don't know of any other business in the state of Oklahoma that requires a license that makes it that simple. I've tried to pass legislation for the last 2 years. I have it in a bill this year that requires more information about the people coming to the state of Oklahoma. Who are you? Where's your money come from? Those are the questions that we should be asking, and that would help cut down on this illicit market that we have.
But do we know where these people are coming from?
They're coming from south of the border. I mean, that's the sad, true reality of all of this is we have a porous border at the south, and if you were to go into any of these major grow operations, especially out in rural areas, we don't have people, Oklahomans, who have lived their lives here and they're like, man, I can't get a job in this area, I'll go work at this grow operation. I was just talking with a fire chief from a rural county who had a fire at a grow operation. When they arrived, there were Chinese foreign nationals pouring out of this building. They couldn't get in to put the fire out because all the Chinese nationals were fleeing the scene. They didn't want to be caught up in that dynamic. That's where human trafficking is coming. If you were an international crime syndicate, if you were a drug cartel, what would you want? You'd want a place central in the United States. Oklahoma fits that. You'd want a place that had the easiest, most lax laws that allowed you to produce and distribute. Oklahoma has that. Now we're being asked, let's liberalize it even more to make it easier to bring in human trafficking, to provide the workforce for these operations, and let's allow it to be easier for the distribution of product and the laundering of money. I can't understand why we can't just tap the brakes. We've already got medical marijuana, and let's start coming and let the science catch up and get our public educated. At the end of the day, back like I said, this is big tobacco now moving into big marijuana, and they see where the weaknesses lie, and they are trying to capitalize on it. We could tap the brakes and say, let's start finding out what marijuana does to a child or anybody under the age of 25 whose brain isn't even fully developed. We already know.
I get a chuckle every time I hear him say something like big marijuana. There's something on the order of 12,000 licenses, and I would bet that 10,000 of them are owned by individuals, and there is no single licensee in Oklahoma that would garner even more than 1% of the market. So the myth of big marijuana is just that. It's a myth. And we talked about Chinese nationals and human trafficking, and that's illegal. That's been illegal for 100 years. It's illegal today, and it will be illegal after 820 passes. So I find it sort of interesting that we want to talk about things that are already illegal and act like that 820 is going to somehow make that legal or make that okay. It's already illegal. We already have the means necessary to combat that. Law enforcement already has the tools available to combat that. They're aware of it, and that will continue after 820 passes.
What's your response to the science behind the hazards of marijuana for people 25 and younger? What's your response as to whether or not a woman who's pregnant ought to be ingesting marijuana and its impact on that unborn baby? What's
Certainly,
your
I
response?
believe that there are laws against that today. There are abuse and neglect laws, and expectant mothers are prosecuted every day all across America for abuse and neglect of children born and unborn. And we have the means to prosecute those crimes. And again, that's been illegal for 100 years. It's illegal today, and it will continue to be illegal after 820 passes.
why are you
So I
pushing?
don't know why you want to insinuate that somehow 820 is going to make it okay for people to abuse children, and that's simply just not true.
But why do you push a product that you know does harm to children? Why, that's the point. That's what tobacco did. They pushed a product that they knew was harmful, and
Once
that's what you all were
again,
doing.
this is an adult use. This is not a child use provision. Children are not allowed to use this. And once again, if children are accessing it, then there are abuse statutes that are already on the books that can take care of that. This 820 does not allow access to children, and I can't believe that anyone would bring that up in an honest conversation
I'll give you
and try
statistics on
to
that.
make that seem like 820 would promote that.
So-
That's
Twenty
simply
does
not true.
reduce the child endangerment statute, so it would make it much easier for children to have access to marijuana.
Just
That's
as a
the
point of
fact.
fact, the statutory language in State Question 820 does not affect the child endangerment statute in any way. I've had many lawyers look at that because I've heard the claim from many people. There is not a word in the State Question 820 language that alters Oklahoma's current child endangerment. If it was child endangerment on March 6th, and this ballot initiative passes on March 7th, it will continue to be child endangerment. There is absolutely no truth to that.
So a parent can't move a court to say, I'm concerned about my child's exposure to that hazardous substance in that hazardous environment. Why is that in State Question then, that you make it the judge can't in family relations court consider that information? That is child endangerment.
A parent can't consider whether or not someone has lawful alcohol in their home in those proceedings. They cannot consider whether someone has lawful tobacco. They cannot consider whether someone has lawful prescription pills. What they can consider is if in the consumption of those lawful products, those parents do something that endanger that child's safety and that child's well-being. We are asking for adult use recreational marijuana to be treated the same way we currently treat alcohol and tobacco.
So Mike, in response to your question, or the point you were trying to make, the facts bear this out. And you could go to, there's plenty of websites out there, but one of them talks about in states where it's illegal, we already know that kids are going to use marijuana in states. They'll find a way to access it. But in states that have criminalized or marijuana is illegal versus the states that are legal, the shocking fact is that once it's legalized, the consumption rate goes up among that minority population. So while they say, hey, we're targeting people 21 and older, the statistics bear out that actually the consumers in the underage population now are consuming more marijuana. And we know that it reduces the IQ of heavy consumers of marijuana in those age groups. We don't know what its long-term effects are, but we do know there's a study out there that says reduces your IQ by 8 percentage points. Parents ought to be concerned about the hazards of this product. And so that we use your common sense. You know, kids are going to get access to marijuana. Why are we making it easier for them to access marijuana? You can't simply say, hey, it's 21, kids aren't going to abuse it. The statistics are the exact opposite of what you just argued.
I would say that the studies that I have seen indicate just exactly the opposite. In fact, the study that is most prevalent in the field shows that underage consumption has gone down 8% in states that have passed adult use cannabis consumption. And that study, I don't know who your studies that you're quoting. The study I'm quoting is from the American Medical Association.
So I'm quoting.
What I'm saying is, the most valid study that I can find shows that underage consumption is actually reduced in states where adult use consumption of cannabis is legalized.
So for the folks that are watching this, smart approaches to marijuana. Smart approaches to marijuana. You can go to www, learn more about SAM, S-A-M. And you go to that website. That is operated by the former drug czar under President Obama. He's very outspoken about the hazards of marijuana. If you really want objective information from all these institutions and associations that are here for the protection of the public, you can go to that website and you can get objective information. Don't rely on me, don't rely on anybody else. Read it for yourself, and then you'll be shocked and you'll know why I'm so passionate against this proposition.
I find it interesting that you believe the American Medical Association is not an objective organization putting out health statistics that we can all believe.
You know it.
It's very interesting.
Let's move on to the economic impact. You know, if recreational marijuana becomes legal, it'll be very lucrative. It's going to be taxed. Where will that money go?
So I can tell you at least this, and I don't want to dominate conversation, but I can tell you this. It's already been demonstrated that the projections for revenue into states, not one state has ever met the projection that the proponents argued for. Like on this one, they're trying to claim there's going to be millions and millions of dollars coming into the state of Oklahoma. Not one of the other states that's legalized marijuana or had medical marijuana has the revenue ever met the projections. And what you find is in the states where it has been legalized, it's not some solution to societal ills. The percentage that goes into their budgets is like 1.3% or even less than 1% of the total budget of those states. So there's not going to be some huge influx of money to solve the social ills in Oklahoma.
So we do have a breakdown of where the money is going to go. So 15% tax, that money will be used first to fund the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority, which would also oversee recreational use. Whatever is made above that would be split 10% to the area where it was sold, 30% to the state general fund, 10% to the courts, 30% for schools to use on things like substance abuse programs, 20% for drug treatment programs. So I'm going to go to Mr. Shade. Damien, who do you think, or who decided how this money should be split? Can you just walk us through that decision-making process?
So just to, for transparency, I do not work for the State Question 820 campaign. I work for an organization called Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, and we are more interested in the criminal legal elements of this piece. I know that the campaign was involved with a number of folks who have been working on legalization efforts for some time. They broke this down based on similar tax breakdowns in Colorado and other states. Just as a point of fact, there are multiple states that have exceeded the projections of revenue that were initially given. Now, there are wide spectrums, right, of projection that are made. So I'm certain there are some projections that were just outside of the field of reality that haven't been made in certain states. But there are numerous states that have beaten their revenue projection totals. The second thing that I think is really important to talk about the economic piece of this, as DA Kunstweiler has rightfully said, Oklahoma is currently bearing the cost of a massive marijuana market. And this is important for your viewers to understand. Medical marijuana was never meant to be taxed at a high rate. It was always meant to be taxed lower because we have children who suffer from significant seizures and other things who require cannabis products to save their lives and protect them. So medical was never meant to be a source of significant tax revenue. It was always in the adult use recreational markets where real money was supposed to be brought to bear. And we're talking about between the recreational and medical markets, it's estimated more than $800 million coming to that pie chart that you all just saw over the next 5 years. That money gives us the ability to fight the real drug crisis in this state, which I would argue is fentanyl and opioids. I don't want police and law enforcement spending $1 of our tax money prosecuting nonviolent marijuana crimes. I want them spending all of their resources on the real threat of fentanyl and methamphetamine to our communities.
I would just ask folks to consider how many hard choices that they've made individually or we've made as a state, that they've made their decisions solely based upon money, and how often that has turned out to where they were happy with the decision to chase the dollars to bring in problems that we know are here and will get worse. And that's one of our main points, is we just want folks to consider if chasing the money that is rumored to follow these problems is really worth the negative things that come along with it.
I would say when it comes to the revenue portion, we average about $58 million a month in revenue sales for medical marijuana currently in the state of Oklahoma. That's about what it averages out to be. I often, as a legislator, get asked, what happened to the lottery money? What happened to the gambling money? What happened to this money? What happened to that money? Hey, isn't medical marijuana producing a large sum of money now that we can pay our teachers better or fix our roads and bridges or whatever? And the facts of it are no, they don't. I've been a very strong leader, in my opinion, at the Capitol on marijuana legislation and working to make sure that people who were really trying, Oklahomans, we were really trying to make this work and make this a business model for themselves and their families and invested millions of dollars. I've worked really hard to try to support them. But when you look at it, at the end of the day, no state question that I'm aware of in the history of the state of Oklahoma has ever produced the revenue that is projected. And so what happens as a legislator, I get the calls saying, hey, what happened to all the money? Well, the fact is, medical marijuana, that money goes to OMMA to run the program, and then I believe 75% of everything above what it takes to run the agency goes 75% to education, which we always put in state questions so that we can get people out to support our teachers and our educators. And they never meet the projections. The lottery, I believe, was projected to bring in $350 million additional every year to the state budget. I think it's a stretch to say that it brings in more than $70 million.
But unfortunately, when people go to the voting polls, that's what they vote on. They think, well, I'm going to go vote yes for whatever this thing, lottery or recreational marijuana. It's going to fix our education problem.
Right.
You say it's never gone that.
I'm not aware of a state question that's ever been passed that has met the projections.
Right.
And at $50 million a month, I don't see this bringing in $5 billion over the next few years in revenue to the state. Now, with that being said, those dollars are being used to buy groceries and pay for cars and pay for utilities and pay for homes. So I mean, economically, I guess across the state, they're used in different ways. But as far as what people think comes into the state coffers to pay for education, roads and bridges, and mental health services, and those types of issues, no state question, in my opinion, has ever come close to what is being sold to pass the state question.
But I believe that is sort of built on a fallacy as well. I think that people don't go to the polls and vote for the lottery because we think it'll bring the state a lot of money. I think people go to the polls and vote for a lottery or liquor by the drink or any of the other state questions we've had, a right to work, is because they want the freedom and the opportunity to participate in that marketplace. And oh, by the way, if we can help our schools and our law enforcement, if we can help roads and bridges along the way, then that's great. But I believe that people go to the polls and they vote for that individual freedom to be able to participate in that market, whatever it is, and then the money that's supposedly coming in is just something that is a potential bonus.
And as a point of fact, I just want to point out State Question 788, which was the medical marijuana ballot initiative that I worked on as well, as a policy analyst, has exceeded its revenue projections multiple years. State Question 802, which was the Medicaid expansion measure, has exceeded its revenue projections dramatically. And again, this is revenue generated from the federal government and the Medicaid program, so it's probably not an apples to apples comparison, but it is not factual to say that no state question has generated the revenue that it was projected to revenue. Beyond that, it's really important to note Oklahoma is one of the lowest tax-based states in the nation. The reason why lottery programs and marijuana programs and some of these other pieces cannot make up for the shortfall in our education and our mental health and our addiction treatment is because our lawmakers have chosen to repeatedly lower taxes. Now, I don't have a dog in that fight, right? I don't care if we lower taxes or raise them, but I think it's important that we're honest with Oklahomans and say the reason our tax base is low, the reason why we do not have the education funding and investment that some states do is because we've chosen to reduce taxes, not because of ballot initiatives.
So
I think it's interesting. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have to say something here. I think it's interesting that my friend next to me here uses the phrase, it's a matter of fact, when the matter of fact is just this. Oklahoma Republicans in the legislature, along with House and Senate Democrats, in 6 years ago, or 5 years ago, passed the largest tax increase in the state of Oklahoma. So it's not because we continue to just cut taxes. We care about education, and we have funded education to historic levels in the state of Oklahoma over the past 6 years. I'm just saying that when you put a state question on the ballot and it's going to fund education, it's not going to fix that education problem. And to Mike's point, I agree with him. A lot of people don't vote for the money and the revenue that's going to go in the state coffers. They vote because they want to participate in whatever the state question is. But I also, sitting in my office daily, have people that come in and say, I voted for State Question 788 because I want the tax revenue to come into the state coffers to help fund education, to help fund roads and bridges, to help mental health services. And they think that it brings in a large amount of money. And the fact of the matter is, if we're talking about facts, education absorbs over 50% of the state's entire budget. And so it's not that we're not funding these programs, it's just we're limited to how much we can fund them because we have a constitutional mandate in the legislature to have a balanced budget every year. So we have to live within our means annually.
And so interestingly, when you look at the states that have legalized marijuana and gone down the same routes that's being proposed, now you have lobbyists in those states who are actually petitioning the legislators to reduce the tax burden that they promised that they would pay for the sales of their product. So just because they say, yeah, this is going to be great and you can go ahead and tax us at this rate, now they're going back in those other states to say it's too high of a burden upon us. So they want what they want up front, and then they're going to ask for relief on the back end, and that's borne out by statistics.
Okay, we talked a few minutes ago about tobacco use in here, and we're talking about taxes here. Cigarettes are taxed at $2.03 a pack. That means a pack-a-day smoker spends about $70 a month. The average marijuana user consumes 3/8 of an ounce, meaning at a 15% tax. Buying the bottom of the barrel marijuana would cost $1.12 a month. Even buying top of the line users would only pay $16.87 a month. So why the difference? Why should there be a sin tax on cigarettes and not marijuana?
If I may speak to that just on the tax portion of it, when you look at taxing marijuana, and when you look at any statutory change to this industry, you have to be careful and have balance. Because if you overtax it, then people are going to divert to the black market. And that's just the facts. And so there's been proposals out there in my 4 years of working on this issue, do 30%, do 35% tax on marijuana. The problem with that is I can go buy it on a street corner illegally with no tax. So the citizens that are wanting to participate in the marijuana program currently in the state of Oklahoma, they are happy to pay those taxes to the state of Oklahoma to help fund the things that they believe in. And so if you overtax this product, you create a larger black market because it's too expensive. And I go back to what I said earlier. In Oklahoma, when they first started selling product out of marijuana dispensaries and grow operations, indoor grown marijuana was selling for $3,500 a pound, $2,800 a pound. It's now they're lucky if they get $800, $900, or $1,000 a pound. Outdoor grown marijuana was selling for somewhere in the range of $500, $600, $700, $800 a pound. Now I have people that call me and say, hey, people are offering to sell me their outdoor grown marijuana for $150 a pound. And so if you're not careful with the tax piece, then you overtax and you just send people to the diversion of the black market.
And that's the thing I think we've overlooked the most tonight is you're talking about the legal industry that you deal with, but the numbers bear out that Oklahoma is the nation's leader in supplying the rest of the country with black market marijuana. And so the issues that we get bogged down on Oklahoma consumers really hides the main concern that we have with the industry and the explosive growth that we've seen and how much marijuana we produce. We're sending marijuana to virtually every state in the union, and until we can get a handle on that, most of the rest of the issues that we debate are such small factors in really what's going on with the industry in Oklahoma.
I really like the point that both of you are making about price incentive. I just see that very, very differently. The moment that you increase the supply of a product, what happens? You decrease the demand because you decrease the price incentive. Nothing hurts these criminal cartels more than cheap, abundant, legal adult use product. The current system is incentivizing the illicit market. I think it's really important for viewers to also know that the main culprit for what's been called the Wild West in Oklahoma of medical marijuana, especially in that 12-month horizon that the representative was speaking about before, is the fact that the former state attorney general filed an injunction against the seed to sale process that was meant to make sure black market product couldn't just go willy-nilly all across the state and across the nation. It was action that went against what voters asked for in 788. They wanted a market that was transparent and regulated, that had seed to sale. And it was a decision of the former Attorney General's office that has created a lot of the chaos that rural farmers are dealing with and that D.A. Kunstweiler has referenced.
And I think there's a difference too. We're here tonight talking about a state question. And really, most of what I've heard tonight, the complaints against the state question really have to do with enforcement of existing statutes and have nothing to do with State Question 802 or the industry moving forward in the legal market. And I agree with all of those, and I think everyone here tonight and probably everyone out there listening agrees that we need to step up enforcement. The illegal operators are the enemy of us all. Whether you're in the industry or not, whether you're law enforcement or not, whether you're a state official or not, people in the industry want those illegal operators gone, perhaps even more than everyone else does. A legal operator in the industry pays the taxes, they do the compliance, they pay those costs that the illegal operators don't. And many of those operators in the legal market will say, I can compete against anyone, but I can't compete against illegal. Do something to stop the illegal and bring it back to the families who are putting their life savings on the line, pulling money out of their retirement, and perhaps the man, woman, their spouse, their children are working in the whether it be a dispensary or a grow operation, and they're working day and night trying to make a living and feed the family, and hoping upon hope that at the end of the day there's a little bit left for a retirement at the end of the rainbow. And so yes, let's step up enforcement. Let's get rid of those illegal operators. Let's keep the taxes low so that the black market cannot thrive, and we give Oklahoma families an opportunity to have the American dream and have a wonderful communities in our state to live and work and raise our families.
The passage of this state question would have a chilling effect on what the legislature is working on to clean up the problems we have, what the state agencies, county governments have been working on, because we saw that with the reluctance of the legislature to get involved in this, and another vote by the people to expand the industry would slow down the progress about the very problems that you claim to want to see fixed.
I don't understand why that would be the case, though. The passage of this will mean, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, 0 new dispensaries in the state of Oklahoma for at least 2 years. How could something that would produce 0 new dispensaries, but literally allow the hundreds of thousands of Oklahomans who are currently in the shadows, breaking the law every day, getting weed from their friends who have medical cards or their family members who have medical cards, it allows them to come out of the shadows, buy their product lawfully, and have that product regulated and taxed? How would that change anything that the legislature is doing?
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Sure.
Damien, I'm curious, because I've had this conversation many, many times about, somebody in the family has a medical marijuana card, others are utilizing the marijuana card. I would say roughly 3 people per marijuana card is what is actually being used. So my 10% number on the population a while ago is actually higher. But with that being said, I don't understand how recreational marijuana changes that. I'm confused on that piece.
Changes which component?
That people using marijuana aren't going to continue to use marijuana. I mean,
They'll legally be using marijuana, right?
Okay,
so right now,
okay.
all of those 3 people you're talking about for every medical card,
Very good.
those people are breaking the law,
Okay.
right? And in this framework, those people would be able to legally go to the store, purchase their own marijuana, and then pay city sales tax, pay the various taxes that were in that pie chart, and help us pay for the cost of the massive marijuana market we already have. Like, it feels to me a little bit like the opponents of this measure are kind of living in a space that isn't real. We have a massive marijuana market in this state right now. What we don't have is the tax revenue and the regulatory infrastructure to manage that industry.
So
What
I
you
would
ask, and what it would do to harm the efforts now is you have a fledgling agency in the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority that now will be thrown off of their game of building out a program to handle these, to have to adopt a brand new set of standards that will take months, if not years, to stand up, and will divert them away from the mission that they're just now beginning to get their feet underneath them on.
I think that may not be quite accurate. We've met with the OMMA to talk about implementation, and really you're talking about the same set of rules. You're only talking about another license for this. No new license, no new licensees, the same number of dispensaries, the same number of grows, the same number of processors, and that's assuming that you have 100% of the licensees want to cross over and enter the adult use market. But it will be the same set of rules, the same guidance, and they will just overlay that. Everything will be the same. It will be implemented seamlessly with what is already in existence. And so I don't see any real extra time that it would take OMMA, and I think everyone that I talk to, whether it be state officials, law enforcement, or people in the industry, have great confidence in Director Berry and just the great strides that she and OMMA have made over the course of the last year and a half that she's been there. And we expect no less going forward. We see the strides getting larger and better as time goes on, and every day goes by seems like OMMA does an even better job. So we don't see an issue with OMMA overlay. It's the same program, the same rules, the same people enforcing against with the same licensees in the field. So we see no problem, no extra work, and no additional enforcement or compliance on the part of the agency.
It's interesting sitting here in the middle because I agree with both sides on several issues. But as Damien was just talking about the tax revenue, those people will be buying legally now, paying taxes. Well, if they're purchasing it from somebody that holds a card right now, they're essentially already paying those taxes. So it's my observation that legalizing recreational marijuana would help those people in Oklahoma that are legally trying to own businesses and make a life for their family through this industry. But most of that business is coming from out of state. Most people in Oklahoma that want to utilize marijuana are already utilizing marijuana. The only Oklahomans that are going to be new to the cannabis industry are those people that just, I don't know, maybe they're having a bachelor party and they want to go buy some pre-rolls or something. Now, let's just be honest. If we're going to really get down to brass tacks here, let's just be honest. It's going to be a few Oklahomans that just want to maybe try it, or they're having a Super Bowl party this weekend and they want to try it or something. The majority of the revenue that will come in from a state question passed on recreational marijuana will be out-of-state revenue. People coming from Texas and other states surrounding us to our business owners, and that will help our business owners. At the end of the day, I agree with both sides of this issue on a lot of these situations, but the revenue increase is coming from out of state.
I want to finish up by addressing what you brought up earlier. Something I've heard since I was a little kid, that marijuana is a gateway drug. Is it fair to say that? Is it a gateway drug?
Yeah, you can find through any of the research literature, especially through associations like the American Medical Association, like the American Psychiatric Association, like the American Pediatric Association, an intense distaste to try to legalize or create medical marijuana outside the oversight that would exist through the Food and Drug Administration. We only came by way of Advil or Tylenol or any of those drugs through the FDA because it had the oversight to say, all right, here's the way it ought to be safely consumed. But what we know statistically, and it's borne out through research, that marijuana is an introductory drug that oftentimes leads to the consumption of other illegal substances. What you're not hearing from this other side, and it's the public's health crisis. Dr. Dart in the Tulsa County Health Department spoke to that at the last session that we had, in which he was pointing out there's just such a huge public health crisis going on through the consumption of marijuana. Emergency rooms are being overrun by people who are suffering from cannabis disorder, and they're coming in with psychosis. There has to be a reason why we're seeing an increased rate in psychosis and anxiety and depression and suicide. We know all those things are emanating from something. I go back to the same question I'm asking earlier. You know, this isn't the marijuana that existed. People talk about it all the time. This isn't your mom and dad's marijuana. What's the point, Mark? What's the point of needing to increase the potency and the concentration of THC in marijuana, what is the point of doing that if it's not to try and get people to be addicted to it, which is the same play card that the tobacco industry used. This is a business decision that is being wrought upon Oklahomans, and they are trying to capture a market. And they can claim, hey, there's enforcement out there. Well, if they really cared about enforcement, then why is this the pie chart? You know, you talked about it. Where was the section out there that says we're going to help out OBNDD so that they can deal with this overrunning market? There's no money cut out for that because their interest is not in enforcement.
Now, I do want to give the other side a chance to respond to the gateway drug question.
Well, I'll just say that you can search academic peer-reviewed studies and you will find absolutely no literature supporting that claim. The claim doesn't even make a lot of sense. A gateway drug to which other drugs? We could make the same arguments about alcohol. There's actually a lot more research literature to the idea that alcohol is much more of a gateway drug because of its social permissiveness and acceptance in our society. But both of those points kind of miss the fundamental reality that Oklahomans have decided that this should not be a criminal legal issue. This really is about the individual freedom of Oklahomans to decide for themselves. Is this something that I want to partake in or not? And I believe that that fundamental freedom is about empowering communities. D.A. Kunstweiler has continued to ask, what's the rush for this? And what is the reason why this needs to happen quickly? One, because we are dealing with the social cost of a massive Colorado-style marijuana industry right now, and we are not absorbing any of the tax benefits. Two, when he talks about money not going to particular law enforcement entities, what he doesn't tell you is a significant portion goes to the general revenue. The legislature would be empowered to take every dime of that and give that to drug enforcement and other agencies to deal with these issues. That is for the lawmakers who are lawfully given that role and empowered to deal with these issues. And then finally, the biggest piece of all of this, why does it make any sense for someone who sold drugs in 2016 or 2017, who sold marijuana then, to have a hard time going to college or getting a home or getting a job in 2023 when that person has tried to move on with their life and make a better life? State Question 820 creates an opportunity for us to resolve all of these issues. The remarkable piece of this to me is that the arguments of the no side are the same arguments that have been used since the 1930s and 40s to describe the panic and outrage that people should feel towards marijuana. We know that all of that messaging comes from racialized desire to say that the racialized communities, which were primarily black and then communities of Hispanic descent at the time that were profiting from and producing marijuana, that those communities needed to be criminalized. Getting rid of that criminal stigma and the market of downstream bad effects is worth it to change the status of this policy.
So my argument in response to that is I'm fighting on behalf of children, right? You talk about individual rights. Well, what about the individual right of that baby who's in utero, who's being told by a marijuana dispensary that it's okay, the mom's being told it's okay to go ahead and consume marijuana to deal with your nausea when science tells you it does the exact opposite. It affects that baby's birth weight, it affects that baby's brain development, it affects that baby's ability to deal with anxiety when that baby comes out of the womb. I'm fighting on behalf of all those children out there who are going to be seeing this unlimited marketplace of marijuana because adults now are seemingly saying, hey, it's okay. Anybody can have it, and we know the downstream effects of that are impacting their IQs and it's limiting their ability. I'm trying to fight for the businesses in this state where we know people who are consuming marijuana have a higher percentage of absenteeism, they have a higher percentage of being involved in an industrial accident, they have a higher percentage of being injured on the job. This is an issue that affects every single citizen, and I want to help all those people. There shouldn't be a rush to ignore the science, and that's what ultimately, at the end of the day, they don't want anybody to know is what's the science behind this? Because once people know what the science is, they'd be horrified about what it's doing to our state.
As it pertains to a gateway drug in that question, it's tough. It's a tough answer. Both sides are right. Both sides could be wrong. At the end of the day, gateway drug to me could be cigarettes, it could be alcohol, it could be marijuana. The first drug you may have tried may have been crack cocaine. I don't know. Whatever it is, at the age of 54 now, growing up as a musician around a lot of people in my life who utilize some form of alcohol or drugs, what I've come to realize is it's mental health issues. People who use drugs habitually to escape, and that's what I think at the end of the day we're all talking about, and it is the concern. They have some sort of mental health issue. They need to slow their mind down because their mind is constantly racing. So if we're going to do anything with any money that comes from any of these types of programs, we need to put that money into mental health issues. And we need to start that at a very young age in middle school. 6th, 7th graders need more counselors in school to help them as they go through those formative years into high school. So mental health issues to me is what most people who end up doing drugs for a lifetime are trying to overcome.
Is that something all of you could agree with, imagine?
Well, I would say the scientific literature says it's the worst thing you could possibly do right now with this concentrated marijuana is think that that's somehow going to cure your anxiety or resolve your ills or your racing thoughts, Scott. With all due respect, this concentrated level of marijuana is creating chaos in the mental health community, and we have got to be able to recognize that this is a for-profit industry that's trying to get our population addicted.
Understood. But what my point is the reason why people get addicted and spend a lifetime of use, in my opinion, on drugs and alcohol is because they have some sort of mental health issue that they're trying to bring into control. And whether it works or it doesn't work, that's what they're searching for.
Well, we're going to leave it right there.
Oh, sorry.
No, do you want to finish your
I
thought?
was going to say, there's a big component here that I think is really important for the audience to know. Oklahoma has one of the most underfunded mental health and addiction systems in the nation. The Department of Mental Health and Substance Use Service estimates that for every 3 Oklahomans who need significant mental health and addiction services, right now our funding model allows us to serve just 1 of those folks. So 2 in 3 Oklahomans with significant substance use and mental health needs are not getting those resources. Imagine what $500 million over the next 5 years invested into mental health, addiction treatment, education, social services, and I hope even law enforcement could do to help those populations.
Well, we want to thank you all for taking part in this discussion tonight, and we hope that it has helped you get ready to head to the polls on March 7th.
Of course, stay with News Channel 8 for results and reaction from the big vote. Have a good night.